I knew something was off the second my console loaded to a blank screen. No error message, no timeout, just a clean void where my system dashboard should have been. I refreshed once, then again. Still nothing. My hand hovered over the mouse muscle memory kicking in, trying to navigate toward config logs that no longer existed. Gone. Like I'd never had access at all. By the time I made it down to the second sub-level, the part of the building nobody tours during onboarding my gut had already done the math. No reporting dashboard, no alerts, no backup utility license. Someone had pulled the cord and wrapped it in PR tape. Trent Drayton was waiting by my cube, or rather loitering. The kind of executive who thought leaning against a desk made him more approachable. His shirt was crisp teeth, whiter than protocol compliance, and the lanyard around his neck read CIO 2. That alone should have warned me. Morning, Laurel, he said, voice all vowels and marketing polish. Quick thing your tool set's been consolidated. It's part of our strategic cost realignment. Nothing personal. I looked at him for a long second, not with confusion, with the kind of silent recognition you give to someone who's just said something incredibly stupid but doesn't realize it yet. Then I turned to my drawer and pulled out my notebook. The real one, leather-bound, no cloud backups, no sync, just ink and patience and 15 years of annotated infrastructure nobody upstairs even remembered we used. Inside were subnet trees drawn by hand passwords embedded in mnemonics only I understood, and the routing logic for our pre-market trade queuing system, still duct taped together from the 2008 crisis rebuild. Trent watched me flip through pages like it was a prop. He didn't know what he was looking at. Didn't know that page 17 was the only living copy of the FTP to blockchain bridge schema. Didn't know that I'd never trusted any of it to get. I smiled faintly. Not warmly. It's fine, I said, sliding the notebook into my bag. I've got what I need. He gave a tight fake chuckle and wandered off, already absorbed in Slack threads and scheduled optics. I sat down, logged into the one terminal they hadn't yet sunsetted, and began quietly deleting my local scripts, not out of spite, but precision. Then I opened a fresh document. Its title was Simple Contingency Plan. Phase 0. They call it the Vault. I call it home. Down 2 flights past the print room no one stocks anymore. Past the vending machine that hasn't worked since 2015. There's a gray steel door with no label and a keypad, so old it squeaks when you press the keys. Behind it, my office. Climate controlled only because the servers demand it, not because anyone up top thought to keep engineers comfortable. No one comes down here unless something's broken. Even then they send an intern first, like it's a haunted basement. Most of the company doesn't even know the vault exists. The ones who do assume I'm part of the furniture, some necessary evil the infrastructure requires, but they never budget for. The desk's been mine since 2007. There's a router shell propping up my monitor, and a sticky note from Janet Morvan still pinned to the corkboard. Don't let the fire suppression kill your coffee. She was the last person here who knew what the network map really looked like. We kept copies offline naturally of the entire pre-cloud infrastructure. When Janet retired, she left me her last backup drive in a hollowed-out copy of Linux Bible. I still haven't cracked it. Feels too final. The systems around me breathe like old dogs. Half the firmware I babysit was last patched when people still said Web 2.0 without irony. When the audit tools crash, I patch logs manually. When the trading pipelines stall, it's usually a forgotten Perl script buried in a legacy module nobody migrated because nobody could, nobody except me. 6 years ago, they stopped inviting me to roadmap meetings, said they were moving fast, cloud native first, whatever that meant. I didn't fight it. I just kept showing up, kept fixing what broke, and quietly added a line to the bottom of my own weekly checklist. Maintain fail-safe logic offline only. It's funny the things you keep out of habit. I built a mirrored job queue in Bash that runs at 3:27 a.m. every Monday, copying audit deltas to a local vault partition with no network card. No one asked for it. No one knew it existed. Until now. By Friday afternoon, the silence from upstairs was loud enough to be deliberate. Not a single follow-up from Trent. No one asked why my dashboard access had vanished or why the syslog alerts were now failing to route to my console. I knew what that meant. They were cutting around me, not through me, hoping I'd disappear like a legacy comment in code no one wants to touch. So I did what I've always done. I wrote a report. I opened a fresh draft, titled it Weekly Risk Bulletin, Legacy Stack, and typed like I was filing an obituary no one would read, but everyone would someday regret ignoring. The language was dry, bureaucratic, and carefully framed. Paragraph 1 covered failover dependencies between our FTP bridges and the offsite sync vault. Paragraph 2 outlined the encryption logic still active in 3 core services: custom schema, undocumented no public key backup. Paragraph 3 detailed the nightly job queue responsible for trading audit logs running on an isolated shell with no cloud redundancy. I didn't raise alarms. I didn't highlight anything in red. That's not how this works. I buried the key truths beneath polite phrasing and passive voice the way you do when you've learned that shouting gets you archived faster than whispering. At 3:51 p.m., I hit send. Then I walked across the room to the old HP laser printer, one of the few still connected directly to my terminal, and waited for the machine to spit out 32 pages of architectural maps. They printed slow and uneven toner, dragging like graphite, as if the system itself was reluctant to let go. I folded them, carefully slipped them into a plain manila folder, and slid it into my bag alongside my notebook. Before I powered down for the weekend, I scrolled back to the bottom of the memo and added 2 final lines. No bold, no underline. Just this root user credentials last rotated 03/21/7 master keychain stored in offline environment access, not replicated. Then I shut my terminal, zipped my hoodie, and walked out of the vault for what I suspected might be the last time. By the time the sun rose over Boston on Monday morning, Halverk's trading floor had already started to buckle. At 4:22 a.m., the first error hit trade API endpoints timed out, returning nothing but silence. No fail-safe trigger, no fallback. Just a spinning wheel where transactions should have been confirmed. 4 minutes later, a junior support tech named Ravi tried to SSH into the main event queue to reroute jobs manually. His login stalled, froze, kicked him out. By 5:06 a.m., investor logins were failing across all regions. Authentication tokens expired instantly. One by one, clients saw a red banner blink across their dashboards. Session expired. Please contact administrator. But there was no administrator. Backups wouldn't decrypt. The archive mirror spit out a permissions mismatch. Then it threw a CRC error. When Trey Calhoun finally arrived at 5:35, hair uncombed, Patagonia pullover askew, still holding a kombucha from yesterday, he barked at 3 engineers to reroute through the containerized stack. The stack fell flat. The Docker pull hung. Kubernetes flailed like a drunk swimmer in open water. Every script they'd bragged about during the last quarterly review failed silently. 0 redundancy. 0 restoration. Someone, I think it was Maya from compliance, finally asked the question out loud. Who has the recovery credential for the legacy FTP block? Nobody answered. Ravi scrolled through the internal credentials vault and tried the last root password listed, Halvark root 2021. Access denied. Tried again. Denied. Account locked. He turned to Trey, whispering, "Did anyone ever update this after Laurel left?" Trey blinked. That's when someone checked the system logs. I was long gone, sipping weak coffee on my porch, but I can imagine the moment perfectly. The cursor. Blinking the screen, pulling up the audit history, and there, clear as day. Last successful root login, Friday, 4:57 p.m. User, El Trenholm, root. No other system action since. I hadn't broken anything. I hadn't sabotaged a single file. I just walked out and left exactly what they wanted, a system no one else could control. And somewhere inside the panic, someone finally opened my risk memo. By 9:10 a.m., the system wasn't just failing, it was flagged. Halvark's internal auditing tool, a clunky thing with a habit of false positives, lit up with a cross-check alert. Elevated system-wide failure. Source C. Trenholm L. Weekly Risk Bulletin. Legacy Stack. Someone in compliance had actually opened it, probably because nothing else was working. That someone was Rafi Temple, a junior officer with a law degree and an allergy to executive ego. I only met him once briefly in an elevator, but I remember the look in his eyes, sharp, observant, and just bored enough to be dangerous. He read my memo all the way through. By 9:18, he'd escalated it to the CIO's inbox with the subject line, "Urgent memo flagged prior to infrastructure incident." Within minutes, PR was looped in, legal followed. And then Brent, the same manager who once told me to modernize my tone when submitting status updates, was yanked into a 7-way Zoom that, from what I've heard, felt more like a tribunal than a meeting. I wasn't in that call, obviously. But someone who was later forwarded me a transcript snippet. Right after Trey tried blaming a failed GitHub action, someone read aloud an internal email thread from 2 weeks prior. Cutting Laurel Trenholm saves 217K Q3. Low risk. Stack is stable. T. Drayton, 8:42 a.m. subject line. Budget optimization targets. Rafi apparently asked just one follow-up who signed off on this without understanding a single system map. Nobody answered. Brent looked down. Legal started scribbling. Trey mumbled something about technical debt and legacy risk management, but no one was listening anymore. Because while they were scrambling to assign blame, the platform remained frozen. Clients were locked out. Trading queues stalled. And the one person who could explain the underlying architecture had already been off-boarded by email. I didn't need to gloat. The silence did it for me. And when my burner phone lit up with a message that simply said, "Name your price," I opened my notebook and started a new page. The first call came from Janet. I let it ring, not because I was angry, Janet and I go too far back for that, but because I knew what she was calling to say. She was always the first to notice the cracks before they split the floor. And I didn't need her sympathy. Not yet. Trey emailed next. Something about collaborative urgency and reassessing stakeholder value. I deleted it before the second sentence. Then Brent called twice block number, of course. Classic Brent, still trying to manage fallout with plausible deniability. But the real message came through on my burner just after noon. No greeting. No name. Name your terms. Please. I stared at the screen a long time before answering. Not out of pettiness, but precision. They'd made their move on Friday. I'd made mine in silence. Now the silence was speaking back, and I wanted to make sure it said the right thing. I typed slowly, clearly. Restoration session, $250,000 up front. On-site only. 1 hour included. $10,000 hour thereafter. No documentation provided. No recording permitted. Payment due before engagement. No emoji. No smile. Just business. I hit send, then flipped my phone face down on the table and went back to organizing my fishing gear. The lake outside was quiet. Still. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring after too many years in the server rooms, buzzing with fan coils and power hum. They would pay it. I knew that. Not because I was holding them hostage, but because the system already had. Halvark was frozen in place, and I was the only one who had ever bothered to remember which legacy job controlled the timestamp audit tokens. They'd built redundancy on top of redundancy containers inside containers, but they never mapped the foundation, never asked who maintained the heartbeat scripts or updated the offsite archive scheduler, because it had never failed until now. Somewhere someone was trying to remote in, trying to bypass the security partitions, but I already knew what they were about to learn the hard way. The vault couldn't be accessed without a physical presence, and I was the only one with the key. Tuesday, 1:00 p.m. sharp. I walked through Hallvark's glass entrance in the same boots I'd worn fishing the day before. Mud still crusted along the soles. Nobody stopped me. Not security, not the admin at the front desk, just a long silence and a few wide eyes as I passed. I didn't flash a badge. Didn't need one. The guard at the elevator saw my face and just nodded. The execs were already waiting in the lobby outside sub-level 2, fidgeting like school kids outside a locked classroom. Trey stood off to the side, sleeves pushed up like he thought it made him look in control. Brent held a tablet but wasn't looking at it. No one spoke as I walked past them and punched in the door code to the vault. Still the same. Cold. Humming. The air smelled like ozone and history. I unzipped my hoodie, dropped my bag next to the terminal, and pulled out my notebook. The room fell quieter as I flipped through the pages, landing on the one with the legacy partition keys. Then I began typing. No instructions, no narration. I restored access partition by partition. 11 in total. Audit logs, transaction queues, backup verification nodes. The pre-market engine all blinked back to life like someone resuscitating a barely breathing patient. The executives leaned in, trying to watch without hovering. Their shoes clicked too loudly. I could feel Trey sweating behind me, probably wondering if I was going to mention the email. I didn't. I just focused. 48 minutes and 17 seconds later, the final verification pinged green. I stood, closed the notebook, and returned it to my bag. "That's your problem fixed," I said, and nothing more. I zipped up my hoodie, slung the strap over my shoulder, took one long look at the vault, then turned and walked past the suit still blinking, like they'd seen a ghost. None of them noticed I hadn't touched the mirror sync process. The off-site vault stayed disconnected, because that script, that one still ran off a box with no network access and no recovery path unless you knew where to stand. By Wednesday morning, the panic had taken on a quieter tone. No more flailing meetings, just whispers, closed-door calls, and a new urgency in the way people said my name. That afternoon, compliance dug deeper. Someone finally bothered to trace the root of the encryption logic I'd implemented across the infrastructure. It wasn't in Git. It wasn't in Confluence. It was a proprietary schema, custom logic wrapped in a hybrid of binary and rotted shell sequences I'd developed over the course of 5 years. And it wasn't theirs, because in 2010, after one too many meetings where I was told my work was overly technical, I'd filed a provisional patent out of sheer spite. Never pushed it to final, never commercialized, just kept it alive year after year, like an emergency flare no one knew I was still holding. So I called my IP lawyer and said 3 words assert control. Begin registration. He didn't ask why, he just said finally. Meanwhile, someone unearthed Trey's Slack thread from a few weeks back. Time-stamped casual and damning. Just remove her access. She's not essential. T. Calhoun sent 2:17 p.m. following a failed budget proposal. It was forwarded to legal, then to HR. Then I'm told to the board. The punchline was that while they were busy chasing system logs and investor confidence, the most critical architecture, the off-site job scheduler, the vault trigger scripts, the failover integrity checks were still running on that undocumented schema. And not one of them knew where the seed values lived, because that system had been designed to survive failure, even internal failure. It ignored container flags. It didn't respond to Slack alerts. It didn't care who was CIO this month or which dashboard had the highest engagement metrics. It only responded to one thing, the hand that wrote it. And as long as they couldn't replicate my schema, they couldn't touch the backbone without risking a full corruption event. They were sitting on a machine held together by logic they couldn't read, built by someone they tried to erase. I didn't need revenge. I already had ownership. By mid-morning Wednesday, the desperation turned polished again. A new kind of performance had taken shape, one wrapped in HR language and polished corporate overtures. But underneath it all smelled the same panic dressed in PowerPoint. Brent's email came in around 11:12 a.m. The subject line read, "Appreciation and Opportunity." The body was even worse. Laurel. After internal review and consideration of recent events, we're prepared to offer a revised package reflecting your value to Halvark. Triple your previous salary, a 2-year guaranteed consulting retainer, full autonomy over your hours and engagement terms. I stared at it for a full minute before replying. No anger, no smugness. Just a level of detachment only earned after watching people realize what they gave up too late. My reply was a single sentence. You didn't value me when it mattered. Then I attached an updated invoice. Same total as before, $250,000 flat, 1 hour included. $10,000 hour after. Only this time I added a clause at the bottom, no net 30, payable upfront. No further contact post-session. I flagged the email as low priority and archived it. They didn't stop. By that evening, a VP from corporate strategy emailed with an urgent escalation. Legal chimed in with language about temporary licensing and co-ownership options. HR even sent me a pastel-colored feedback form about my transition experience. None of it mattered. They still didn't understand the truth. I wasn't their vendor. I wasn't their asset. I had never been part of their slides or forecasts or bonus justifications. I was the infrastructure, and they let me walk. That night, while their inboxes burned with investor concerns and escalating internal pings, I sat on my porch and watched the lake go quiet under the moonlight. The coffee in my hand went cold. Then my phone buzzed again, this time from Janet. A single text, they're offering you no terms. Just a signature. I didn't reply. I just smiled, got up, and walked inside to check one last file. I cashed the check on a Thursday. They wired it in full. No negotiation, no delay. Just one clean deposit that hit my account like an overdue apology. I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy anything fancy. I just closed the laptop, poured myself a second coffee, and called the realtor about the cabin I'd bookmarked months ago. By the following week, I was gone. No forwarding address, no digital trail. I scrubbed my Git history, deleted my backup drives, and wiped the burner phone that had served me so well. I kept the notebook. Not because I needed it anymore, but because I earned every page. Every scribbled subnet and root command was proof that I hadn't just held the line, I built the damn perimeter. A month later, I flew out to DEF CON under a pseudonym. No badge, no panels, just a room key and a prepaid visa. On day 2, someone took the stage under the name Rogue Schema and delivered a talk titled The Architecture of Power When Redundancy is a Myth. The slides were stripped down, clean, but the logic, every line, was mine. I watched in silence as they walked through the hybrid encryption model I'd written in a fit of caffeine and exhaustion back in 2009. No one in the room knew its origin, but I did, and so did the 2 engineers in the back who furrowed their brows at the schema's recursion pattern. I could see it hit them. This wasn't public code. This had DNA. Later that night, I logged into an old dark web forum and posted one sentence under my old alias, LTL47. Turns out I wasn't too old for tech. Just too good to fire cheaply. No comments, no likes. Just silence, the kind that carries weight. I closed the lid on my laptop and looked out over the treetops, the cabin humming with quiet. No servers, no alerts, no Slack. And still, part of me knew they were rebuilding somewhere in a boardroom trying to recover what they'd lost. What they never understood was that the system wasn't just built by me. It was me.